Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call to order the Comox Valley Regional District Board meeting for Tuesday, October 5th. I'd like to recognize that we're meeting on the unceded and traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. We have Directors Morin, Arbor, Swift, myself, Cole Hamilton, Grieve, Grant, and McCollum in the Civic Room, and Director Kettler on Zoom. I'd like to now read Article 41 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. The organs and specialized agencies of the United Nations system and other intergovernmental organizations shall contribute to the full realization of the provisions of this declaration through the mobilization, inter alia, of financial cooperation and technical assistance. Ways and means of ensuring participation of Indigenous peoples on issues affecting them shall be established. We have a motion to move in camera under section 91A of the Community Charter. Moved and seconded. Anyone opposed? And that is carried. Adoption of the minutes of September 21st. Moved and seconded. Are there any comments or questions on that, on the minutes? Hearing and seeing none. Anyone opposed? And that is carried. I'm just going to give a minute. I see Director Lee coming in via Zoom. We'll put the item on the agenda, the Black Creek Oyster Bay Services Committee minutes for September 20th for receipt. Moved and seconded. Are there any comments on those minutes for receipt? Director Lee, are you okay for us to receive the minutes? Okay, that's a vote of the full board. Anyone opposed?
Hello?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Director Lee.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble because I'm using a different device than I usually use. So on the minutes, there's one error, and it's in the defeated motion on page 2, and it says that it's the top of the page on the second page of the minutes. It says that no new or upsized connections will be approved for any non-in-stream and non-entitled properties within basically Area C portion of Black Creek Oyster Bay Services as defined in the September 17th staff report. But it neglected in that motion to mention that I had said in the nor in the electoral area D portion of the Black Creek Oyster Bay Water Service. So it was C and D that are being looked at for this suspension of service, new service connections, not just Area C as is printed in the motion.
Okay, are we okay to make that, staff are okay to make that a review? Okay.
So that's good.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Director Arbor.
I'm just not being familiar with it. I'm just wondering if this is something that we could defer those minutes for the board to the following board, so that gives an opportunity for a thorough review of the minutes.
Yep, we can refer it back to the committee. Yep, rather than you receiving them at this time.
Okay, so then we won't vote on receipt of the minutes. Is that okay? Vote.
There's one other thing that I just wanted to highlight, and that is that the next meeting is going to be October 18th rather than October 4th, as mentioned in the minutes.
Okay, so those adjustments need to be made. So I think I'll need a motion to refer the minutes. Okay, we have a couple. Anyone opposed to that motion? Hearing and seeing none, then the minutes are referred back to staff. Thank you, and thanks, Director Lee.
Sorry, back to the committee.
Back to the committee.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
See you next time.
See you, Director Lee.
Bye.
Next item on the agenda is the poverty reduction assessment strategy for receipt. Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. Alana Mullally, General Manager of Planning and Development, will provide an introduction to the consultant and the report, and they're available to answer any of your questions.
Thanks. Over to Alana.
Thank you very much, Chair Muir. Through the chair to the directors, I'm pleased to come to you today with the poverty reduction strategy. As you'll remember, this is a key board strategic priority and is aligned with a number of the CBRD strategic drivers, namely community partnerships and Indigenous relations. This plan, as you might know, is the product of many months of work with our consultant Urban Matters, as well as key community partners and the member municipalities. It was an initiative that was undertaken under the umbrella of the Regional Growth Strategy, and it's aligned with a number of the goals in the strategy, in particular housing, public health, and transportation. So we went through an extensive process to get to this point where we've arrived at 14 game changers. And these are the kinds of actions that will have that transformational impact on individuals and families in our community who are living in poverty or who are at risk of poverty. So I should back up a little bit. The project was undertaken to be consistent with the Provincial Poverty Reduction Plan and the provincial goal of reducing poverty across the province by 25% by 2024 and reducing childhood poverty by 50% within that same time frame. Jen Casorso, our lead consultant, is here tonight, and she's going to talk about both our process and then walk through the game changers, identify some really good things for local government in particular to be thinking about where we can have influence, where we can be advocates for poverty reduction, and also where we can look at some of our own programs, policies, and services with that poverty reduction lens. And then she and I will both certainly be available at the end of the presentation for any questions that you have. So with that, Jen, I think is on the line. Jen Casorso.
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Hi, Jen. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you, Alana. Good evening, everyone. As Alana mentioned, I'm Jen, and I'm with Urban Matters, and we are a community contribution company that's focused on working with communities to understand and develop solutions to complex social issues. And we worked with Alana and the project team, and we're grateful to have had the opportunity to get to know the Comox Valley region and community partners more throughout this process. I would like to screen share if that's okay. I have a presentation slide deck to show.
Yeah, go ahead. I believe you're a host.
All right, how's that? Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. I'm just moving a few things around on my screen. Just 1 second. All right. So our team embraced this project with the following purpose and intent. This poverty reduction assessment and strategy provide an opportunity for the regional district to further define its role and responsibilities as it relates to reducing poverty in the region. As well, we recognize that the experiences and issues surrounding poverty are complex, and by having a strategy, it helps to create a common purpose across the community and continues to support existing and new collaborative efforts. And prior to this project initiating, the project team determined an ambitious goal focused on reducing poverty by 25% by 2024. This strategy helps to identify the poverty experiences in the region and opportunities for how to achieve this goal. As part of gathering our understanding of poverty in the region, we examined what myths exist. Throughout the report, you would see a variety of myths. We examined the reality of the experience. And in this case, one myth that surfaced was that poverty doesn't exist in the Comox Valley. And the reality is that at least 15% of residents are living in poverty. If the CBRD was a village of 100 people, we know that the demographics would look like this. 25 of them would be seniors, 14 would be children, 61 would be between the ages of 15 and 64, 15 would be impoverished based on the low income measure set by Stats Canada, and 10 would be in core housing need, and 71 would have an income below 49,000. For those 15% of people living in poverty within the region, they are having to make daily trade-offs and tough choices in their lives. And some examples look like this. The cost of housing leaves little money left for food and other basic needs, so people must choose between suitable housing and their other needs. Families need employment to cover the cost of childcare, but cannot participate in employment or access educational opportunities without childcare. And people are having to choose between choices that make them feel unsafe, like using public transportation systems at night, or spend a large portion of their income on transportation, like owning and maintaining a vehicle in order to access employment, education, and social supports. So how can poverty be reduced in the region? Applying a focus on systems change encourages collaboration and a better connection between experiences with the systems people are trying to access and how to address them. Collaborative action requires that the entire community contribute to action. This means not anyone is solely responsible for reducing poverty. This type of response helps to strengthen and build new relationships, connect different parts of the system, initiate action, foster new ways of working together, and center people with lived and living experience of poverty in the change process. There is great work already happening in the region, and this strategy is intended to build on previous successes and relationships. Through the Game Changers workshop, community partners shared a collective desire to further coordinate under a shared vision of reducing poverty in the region. And their input and support for a collaborative response helped to inform this strategy's game-changing actions. Game changers might be a new term. I believe we've brought this up before in a previous presentation, but they're built on the principles of collective leadership and collective impact. And they involve the entire community. They tackle the root causes of poverty rather than the symptoms by looking at long-term solutions to challenges like childcare, food security, housing, employment, and other factors in affordability. They work to eliminate poverty rather than alleviate it, and they work towards sustainable and systemic change, build strong and supportive and inclusive communities, and enable people to fully participate in the decisions that affect their community. It recognizes the importance of dedicating time, resources, and capacity to achieve transformational impact. Also advocate for the importance of prioritizing core game-changing big ideas as opposed to pursuing many small little actions. There were 3 transformational impact game changers that were identified as having the potential for lasting, widespread impact in reducing poverty in the region. And these are social inclusion, which refers to equity priority groups being given voice, influence, and a sense of belonging in the community. The equitable systems of capital entail making access to resources equitable for all community members. And then community services and supports mean that families and individuals of all ages have resources that they need to thrive. People with diverse identities and lived experiences will feel welcome to live, work, and play within the CDRD free of stigma. And additional game-changing priorities focus under these 7 focus areas: families and children and youth, housing, social supports, livable incomes, food security, accessible, affordable transportation, and social inclusion. Then I'll go through the game changers. So the first 3 game changers are focused on shifting the status quo power dynamics in the community. They focus on inclusion and actions which actively rebalance systems of oppression and power that have marginalized equity priority groups' voices, influence, and sense of belonging in the community. So 1, people with lived and living experiences of poverty meaningfully contribute to all aspects of poverty reduction in the region. 2, that processes, systems, and institutions are actively working towards decolonization, Indigenous peoples and Indigenous organizations have leadership and resource capacity to fully participate in poverty reduction in the region. And an equity lens is applied in all regional and local government programs and services, from planning, budgeting, implementation, and evaluation. Transformational impact is that marginalized individuals and groups have voice, influence, and a sense of belonging in the region. These 3 game changers are focused on how people access important capital like housing and income. Working towards equitable systems of capital enables financial resources to be more evenly distributed and more housing availability for many different families and incomes. The actions here are new non-market housing is incentivized and constructed, and there is a system planning approach applied to the coordination and management of the housing. And then there is implementation of a universal basic income, and that the living wage for the Comox Valley is recognized and upheld by employers. Transformational change is achieved when people have fair access to income and housing. Under community services and supports available for individuals and families, it's an essential part of creating an equitable community. All 7 game changers have high impact potential for the outcomes of families, children, and youth. In addition, they also have direct and cascading impacts on the other focus areas of food security, affordable, accessible transportation, social supports, and social inclusion. The game changers identified are highly interdependent and transformational for poverty reduction in the region. They include childcare that is affordable and available. Social support services are coordinated across multiple organizations, institutions, and governments through meaningful partnerships and across cross-sectoral collaborations. Neighborhood hubs provide community connections to services, supports, and resources. And individuals experiencing mental health, poverty, and/or substance use challenges live, work, and play in a stigma-free environment. And newcomers to the CVRD have access to services, supports, and employment, and community activities. And everyone has access to adequate and healthy food. And transportation network planning is aligned with an equity framework. And as a result, road, active transportation, and transit improvements are prioritized to support underserved groups, regions, and individuals experiencing barriers to access. And public spaces, indoor and outdoor, are designed to be inclusive from physical, social, and cultural perspectives. The transformational change is that individuals and families have the resources needed to thrive in the Comox Valley, and more than just survive, and to live, work, and play free from stigma. Local governments do play a key role in coordinating community resources to address homelessness, establishing land use policies and strategic plans aimed at increasing housing affordability, and investing in municipal infrastructure with key partners that help reduce poverty for residents. For example, increased access to public transit, sidewalk connectivity, reduced fare access to transit and recreation programs. These all contribute to creating a healthy community and ensuring that decisions around policies and plans support everyone in the community. The CVRD has, hang on 1 second. I rotated too quickly. There we go. So in ensuring that the decisions around the policies and plans support everyone, the CVRD has 3 distinct opportunities to influence impacts surrounding poverty reduction. That includes ensuring policy and procedures are reviewed from a poverty impact assessment and GBA plus lens. There's an opportunity to communicate with stakeholders and share data resources, and this includes advocacy opportunities to other levels of government where it is their jurisdiction to address a particular social issue. Also involves creating conditions which enable successful collective impact. This could look like supporting coordination and convening of community partners. So what is possible for next steps? It's an opportunity for the CVRD to communicate broadly the intent to reduce poverty in partnership with the community. identify and integrate a poverty and social impact analysis tool into decision-making processes. This would support applying a social equity lens to decisions. Collaborate with community partners that support focus, area, action, and measures progress, and involve lived and living experience voices in solutions and evaluation. Here's the recommendation that is in front of you today. Thank you for time to present. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Jen. I'll just give a couple of minutes to ask directors if they've got any questions. I might start off one. It's a small one. I noticed on one of your slides the reference to GBA plus. Would you mind defining that? I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah, it stands for Gender-Based Analysis Plus. And so it looks at all of your gender identities, sexual orientation, the intersectionality of age, race, ability, and how that can influence decision-making processes.
Great, thank you. So we have a question from Director Arber.
Thanks. What a great and clear presentation on a kind of really complex topic. And you know, looking at those game changers, some of them may seem easier to implement. I think so when you were reading through them, things that we can basically ingrain in our culture, both at local government and through that lens. And some such one that I think is really good was just saying, you know, that people who have experienced poverty are totally involved and engaged in designing some of the solutions and different aspects of how to address it. My only question that wasn't covered in your presentation, but it is in the report, is your working definition of poverty. You know, I think you had some good stats, but was it a purely monetary income that you were looking at for the poverty bar, or were there other factors that were looked at as well?
Thank you for the question. So at the beginning of our project, we worked with the project team to determine what we wanted to use for a measure of poverty. It's challenging because there are multiple ways that you can measure poverty in a community. And the decision of the project team was to use the low income measure that Stats Canada uses. And it is a measure of income. So it's defined as being below a fixed percentage of income. And a household is considered low income if it's below 50% of the median household income. And many countries use this measure. And so there's a way to compare by using a low income measure. And also Stats Canada has longitudinal data. So they've been measuring in this way since 1976. The project team, though, did recognize that there are multiple influences to someone's poverty experience that are not just monetary in nature. But as a metric to track progress, low income measure was one of the ones that we defined.
Okay, thank you. Director Grieve.
Thank you very much for this report. I actually did try to plow through all 218 pages, but it's quite extensive for sure. I know we've been skating around this issue as long as I've been elected. I guess, you know, the devil's in the details with any of these plans, obviously. We just had a federal election where every one of the major parties were going to create more housing and lower the cost of food. So, you know, are you going to pay the farmers less? Who's going to build the 1.2 million new units that the government's talking about? You know, it's all very well and fine, but it's a zero-sum game that is pluses and minuses. You know, you got business owners. I know business owners that have just about gone bankrupt out there. In one instance, one of my relatives had to sell their house in order to keep their business going. So these are tough times. But just, you know, I think the thing that resonates with me is housing first. It's always been that way. I remember the Canadian Mental Health Association report that pointed to housing as the #1 issue when it comes to poverty and mental health issues. I don't know. I've always maintained that wages are secondary to housing. If you don't have to pay the enormous amounts we're paying right now for a 3-bedroom apartment or whatever for a small family, I think even the statistics in this report are outdated. What, 2019, I think they come from. Well, the times have changed since then even. So, you know, and when they talk about, you know, incentivizing house construction, they generally drop it in the lap of local government. They want people to waive development cost charges, offer tax holidays and such, which directly impacts our ability as local government to affect any of these changes from our side. So I just wonder, you know, in your line of work, you probably have your ear pretty close to the ground. And do you have any idea of where senior government is going in relation to housing? Because everybody can promise the moon during an election, but, you know, when it gets down to rolling up your shirt sleeves and making these things happen, it's not the same thing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Definitely, there's been a lot of progress, I'd say, made around investments in housing by both the provincial and federal governments. I think for the provincial government, the biggest investment has been, if you are familiar with the housing continuum from the housing work that you've previously been involved in, more on the supportive housing end of that continuum. And the federal government is really leaning towards supporting the middle of that continuum, so middle income earners. And I think it's really important to diversify your availability of housing and support sort of everyone within your community. And, you know, we know that the CMHC, Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation, is working on a number of different initiatives that are looking at entry-level home ownership based programs, rent-to-own models. So I think we're going to see some progress over the next short term here, few years, around different types of investments that advance those types of housing models.
Thank you. I see Director Kettler has her hand up online, and then we'll go to Director Julian.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen, for the report. I'm just wondering, in your experience, have you worked with other communities who have done poverty reduction strategies, and do you see benefit to outlining these things? I think many of the game changers we're working on at the regional level. Some of them are beyond the regional level, like the universal basic income, but we can advocate for things like that. And I guess if every community did sign on to these things as supporting them, then that would be a clear signal to the upper levels of government. But as far as the other game changers, have you seen this making a positive difference for other communities and possibly with funding with upper levels of government?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for your question. I do have experience. My previous position was with the city of Kamloops, implementing the city's social plan. So social plan is very similar to a poverty reduction strategy as well, in that it's intended to tackle those complex social issues. So I have experience in terms of developing local government programs that were within the jurisdiction of local government to respond, as well as supporting advocacy efforts and what that would look like to other levels of government. I also have worked with other communities, both in BC and Alberta, around coordinating their efforts as a community to address issues collectively. I think one of the challenges that often happens is a bit of decentralization or disaggregated kind of response that, you know, it's all really great work, but sometimes there's competing priorities or overlap in what people, organizations, that kind of thing are trying to achieve, when there's more benefit in coming together and collaborating and working from a common goal or shared vision. And that's really what these strategies help to facilitate. I'd also say that they They also help to give some context for how local governments can work within this space where it fits within your role and responsibility. So it's not, in no way is this suggesting that you are the implementer of all of these things. It takes a whole community, and you have different leverage points. Whether that's the advocacy, now that you understand sort of the context of the issues and where the community has identified some key priorities, that may be, providing some or having meetings with provincial or federal government ministers in order to advocate for some funding in your community. And that could be associated to housing, which you've already been doing, but it could be around, transit and recognizing that transit is a shared cost, and knowing that that is one of the barriers people face in terms of accessing services and supports, is inadequate sort of access to transit. So there are different ways that you can look at your role, but definitely these plans help to position you in a way that understands what the needs are, and how the community wants to respond.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director William.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much to the authors and the people who worked on this very significant report. I'm interested in a number of aspects of it, including the choice of language. And as one example, you've used the term eliminate rather than alleviate poverty. I think it was about 2,100 years ago that a certain Jewish rabbi said the poor would always be with us. So we're bucking a fairly significant historical trend and prevailing views that in many cases have suggested that being poor is either your lot in life or something that you've brought upon yourself. And I think what we've come to realize increasingly is that there are systemic factors beyond individual control that do in fact influence how we fare in life beyond the accident of birth, and whether we're born into good circumstances or otherwise. But I think the most significant thing in the report for me is that there are numerous things that are recommended that don't necessarily involve huge amounts of money. They involve a shift in the way we organize ourselves. The province of BC for a number of years was believed to have highest rates of child poverty in the country. And we were one of the only provinces without a poverty plan. Perhaps the reason we didn't have a plan was because if you have a plan, then you're obliged to actually do something about it. And that's perhaps the intimidating part of this. We actually are being presented with a plan here. Our challenge is, do we rise to the occasion and see what we can do about it? So I think that we have an opportunity to look at how we operate. And I'll give just one example, which I think we're going in the right direction. We had a strategic planning session last week where our manager responsible for transit was talking about equity as a factor in transit planning. To me, that's a byproduct of this other work that we're doing, looking at the social issues and the impact they have on our communities. And make no mistake, those social issues, poverty costs everyone. It's not just an affliction for those who live with it. It holds back our economic development as well as our social development and our desire that everyone would be able to realize their own potential. So I'm really interested in seeing the recommendation go forward and what potential implementation strategies staff would bring to us. I'm also wondering though if perhaps given the grant funding that we received to do the study, whether there's any indication of grant funding that would be available to work on implementation going forward. Thanks.
I don't know if Jen or staff want to speak to that grant offer.
I'll try that one, Chair Hamir. Thanks very much for making that connection, Director Hillian, between the Strengthening Community Grant that we were awarded for $1.2 million and this project. One of the budget items that we included in that grant proposal was education and outreach around poverty and what it means to live in poverty in the Comox Valley. And so in working with partners, particularly the City of Courtenay staff and the Coalition to End Homelessness, we're talking about a good implementation piece being an anti-stigma focused outreach effort. So that's one of the things that I'd like to come back to you if you endorse this recommendation, to talk about some details about how we could use money from that grant to address some of the findings or build on some of the findings in this report.
Thank you. Director McCollum.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Jennifer, for the report. I was really impressed with a lot of the content that was in this, and I also tried to make my way all the way through it, although I'll admit that I did run out of time. I think what really jumped out for me is just the emphasis on collective action. Like any complicated problem in our society, there's never going to be a one level of government solution or a one group solution, and these kind of things need to be tackled from many directions if we're going to see movement on that. And I think there's a lot of parallels with the type of action that we want to undertake to address the issue of poverty and climate. And of course, a lot of climate action equity ties into that as well. One thing that I just wanted to pull out of the report and highlight that I really like the emphasis on is under the suggested actions is bringing and integrating poverty reduction into the CVRD's day-to-day operations. That's certainly something that we're trying under many lenses, both at the municipal and regional level when it comes to climate and other complex problems. And I think it's a worthy change to make when we're looking at decisions is how are they supporting our goals and pulling poverty into that seems very worthwhile to me. One thing that occurred to me is that what this report is really doing is helping us build capacity, both in our organization, but also out in our community, whether it's individual understanding or private business that would like to be involved, or volunteer groups. And what building capacity does is help address the problem, but also may enable us to maximize what other funding is available when it comes down from other levels of government. And so I think that's maybe one of the biggest impacts that we'll have in proceeding with this. And then one question I did have relating to that thought was, there's the suggestion of an action item of bringing in or identifying or creating a backbone organization to co-coordinate. And I know there was a lot of community engagement involved in this work, and I'm wondering if either yourself or staff has given thought to whether or not that type of organization exists already, or this is something that we would need to look toward building as we go forward.
I'm not sure if Alana, you want to talk about the partner community organizations.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Through Chair Humir, it's really hard when we're not in the same room to see that, have those eye conversations.
That's right.
So, but I take a little stab, and then I certainly invite you to please to provide some comment as well. Director McCollum, one thing that became really clear when we were doing some of the targeted stakeholder work was that there was a lot of interest within our community in the collective impact model. I talk a little bit about it in the report, but that perhaps there is a lot of room, both within local government staff, but also within our nonprofit, within our community partners, to really get some help with understanding collective impact and then doing such things as putting it into motion, which really requires that backbone organization. So back to the staff recommendation, that's another piece, if you endorse these recommendations, that I'd like to come back to talk to you about what some opportunities might be to facilitate some of the, bring in some expert help to help facilitate that within our community. And then I would suggest that through the process, I don't think that any one organization emerged as being able to be that backbone organization just yet. But I'm hopeful that that can happen. And I think it's the training piece and the support piece that needs to happen first. Jen, is there anything you would add to that?
No, I think you've covered it. It does take time to sort of cultivate that structure and determine who is the appropriate fit for that and what are the resources required. Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I was just going to add a couple of my own notes before going to Director Grieve. I just want to echo the comments of, thanks for all of the hard work and bringing this report together. I think it's incredibly important for our community to move towards the elimination of poverty, as was noted by Director Hillian. The idea of putting an equity lens for local government, I think, is one that I had thought, in the back of my head for our strategic planning, to put that lens, to add that extra pillar. Now, we had this discussion at strategic planning that being that it's our last year, that we didn't want to start any kind of new thing. So I almost wish that this report had come to us maybe a month earlier, and that, we could have thought about this. Have staff thought, is there still a possibility, if the board agreed to this, to put that lens on the type of work that we do? I know many communities include a JEDI lens, a justice, equity, diversity, inclusion lens on the work that they do. We don't have that as one of our pillars. I'm not sure how this could be incorporated.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think that, the board and the regional district has many lenses that apply to the various services that they have, not just the four, but those four drivers of the board have been the focus during your term over the last 3 years. Adopting this recommendation will provide the opportunity for staff to come back to you and say, here is how this strategy can apply to our services. And here are actions that may be taken, and you can give some direction or consideration to those over the next year. If that's not good enough, and if it really needs a wholehearted application of poverty to all the services, that can be the direction of a subsequent board down the road. But certainly, this is a report that is just not a moment in time, but will very much enable us to provide some advice to you as to how it can be explored and action taken over the next year or so. And again, if that's not good enough, for that to be applied as a driver for our services in subsequent years.
Thank you for that comment, Director Grieve.
Thanks very much. I think Director Hillian was participating at this same workshop at UBCM. They were talking about you mentioned expert help and alluded to our wonderful volunteer groups out there, and so many of them doing so much great work. And it was brought to our attention by Al Richmond, actually, that, really, we're not going to be able to lean on that much longer, the way things are going, that service clubs are struggling. The volunteerism is in decline. Faith-based groups, exist, but they're also diminishing. So we're not going to, possibly in the future, we're going to have to find other ways of delivering services, because, it's huge the way it's structured right now. The province funnels money through to local government, and then we engage the nonprofit sector. And it's just sobering to think that it may not be around that much longer. But what I wanted to ask, and this has been kicked around since as long as I've been in politics, is the idea of coordinating all these groups. We've talked for years about a social planning position for the Valley. And I'd just like to put it on the table that would be one option that I would certainly support going forward with this initiative. Thank you.
Do staff want to comment on that?
Yeah, great idea. And I look forward to our staff's presentation of the means and ideas that we can action on this, and definitely those ideas and the information that has been shared and brought forward by the directors will help inform us.
Great. Thank you. I don't see any other lights on. So let's, why don't, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It reads that this is A, B, and C. The vote, so it is not that needs to be remedied for the receipt of the report as well as representation.
Thank you. Maybe there's a difference between what's on the screen and what's in some of our notes. Yeah, it's been updated. So this is going to be a vote of the full board. Thank you for that, Director Grieve. On receipt, is anyone opposed to receiving the poverty reduction assessment and strategy? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. The recommendation has been moved and seconded. And are there any comments about the implementation strategy or the options moving forward? Hearing and seeing none, is anyone opposed to the recommendation? And that is carried. Thank you very much to staff. That was a fulsome discussion. Item number 3, Electoral Area Services Committee minutes for September 20th. Moved in and seconded. Any opposition to receiving the minutes? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. And we have recommendation number 1.
And Chair, I'll just remove myself from consideration of the ALC applications that go before the board and be back for recommendation number 2.
Thank you. So the recommendation is that the ALC be advised about a DVP on 2069 Coleman Road. That's been moved and seconded, or has it? I don't think it has. Moved by Director Grant, second by Cole Hamilton. Comments on this recommendation? Hearing and seeing none. Is anyone opposed? And that's, sorry, yes, it is a vote of the areas A, B, and C. So that is carried. Thank you. Recommendation number 2 on the Food Hub feasibility study. Moved and seconded Grant and Cole Hamilton. Comments on the Food Hub study moving forward? Hearing and seeing none. Oh, sorry, Director Arbor. Oh, no, sorry.
No, Grieve first, I guess. You beat me to the punch.
I'll flip you for it.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, I'll go first. I did have my finger on the button. If this is reached for the top, I get to answer the question. Okay, my question to the staff, and I think they answered this before, but when we get to the point of appointing a steering committee for this group, that is going to be done at the staff level, is that correct? Because I'm just...
I'll just ask Alana Mullally, General Manager of Planning and Development, to come forward to be able to answer.
I know we had this discussion, but I can't recall exactly what we did. And I am concerned that they were going to have a very diverse steering committee.
Through Madam Chair to the directors. I think Director Grieve, I recall we had that discussion about whether this is a select committee, whether it's a steering committee, and whether or not there was an opportunity for a board member to sit as a voting member or participating member of that committee. And I think what we landed on was the concept of the steering committee. But certainly there is lots of opportunity if this board is interested in having a look at the composition and seeing which organizations might be represented or which voices might be missing. We can, if the board is interested in that, we are very happy to do that, as we did with the Airshed Roundtable project.
Is that okay? Follow up?
Very quickly, thank you. I know that this got a narrow up at the strategic planning session. And it also came up at the electoral area discussion around economic development. So I think it's imperative that we put a bit of cash and capacity into this project, as it is, I think, one of the prime projects at the tail end of our term here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Director Arbor, do you want to click your light?
Yeah, thanks. Another aspect for the rest of the board that was discussed was to what extent this is a rural project versus a municipal and rural project. And there was one of the recommended places, well, the top recommended place for a food hub is in the city of Courtney. So it may be worth for the rest of the board to not just read this as an ESC item, but that there may be benefits to the municipalities also considering their participation in the project.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I don't see any other comments. It's a vote of the full board. Anyone opposed to recommendation number 2? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. Recommendation number 3, that the board give first, second reading to bylaw number 679, the Comox Valley Regional District bylaw adjudication ticketing bylaw. Moved and seconded. Comments on that recommendation? It's a vote of the areas. Is anyone opposed? And that's carried. Recommendation number 4 for the approved budget for the Union Bay Water Service function to increase the funding by a maximum of $58,500. Moved and seconded. Comments on that recommendation? Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. Just really excited to see this project moving forward and some allocation of funds. This is basically going to help us for the next number of years, really better understanding the water system, the components. And most importantly, I know a question that's been high on the mind of community members is the capacity as well, looking at the capacity of the system, and which will also assist us with the future development considerations. So really pleased to see that work go forward. Thanks to staff.
Thank you for that. Recommendation, it's a vote of the full board. Is anyone opposed to number 4? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. Recommendation number 5, that the name Kahmot Conservation Area be adopted for the Comox Valley Regional District Park located within the Morrison Creek headwaters as outlined by staff report. Moved and seconded by Director Arbor. Questions or comments on that recommendation? So we've got a couple. Director Killian.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just be interested to hear the background of the name and the process through which it was chosen.
I'll do my best, and if I need to be stand corrected, Doug DeMars will stand in, but it was in consultation with Comox First Nation, and it was Chief Nicole Rempel that participated to provide this name. And generally, it's referring to much medicine, an area of lots of medicine. And given that the plants in the area are known amongst Comox First Nation to have those values.
Thanks. I really appreciate that being on the record.
Thank you. Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair. It's my understanding, just for clarification, that the Morrison family was also provided some input and were very supportive of this. So I thought that was maybe someone could clarify that.
I'll just ask Doug to come forward with respect to that.
Thanks, Director Moore. We'd have to get back to you with that clarification.
Pardon me,
I'd have to
sorry?
get back to you with that clarification.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought I had read that somewhere in one of the reports
Could
that,
be, yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on recommendation number 5? Hearing and seeing none, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. Recommendation number 6, that the 2021 rural community grants be awarded with the following amounts. And maybe I'll just read them quickly because there's some great projects. The Macaulay Road and Area Neighborhood Association for $1,000. Anderton Therapeutic Garden Society, $1,500. Mountain Air Avian Rescue Society had 250 from areas, I believe A and C, and 500 from A and B gave 250 and area C gave 4,000, I believe. The Merville Community Association, 700, and then the Hornby Island Housing Society got 10,000. Moved and seconded. Are there any comments or questions on the rural grants? Director Arbor.
I always like to provide a little bit of information. As you folks know, Hornby and Denman are outside of our housing function, but that doesn't mean that they don't have housing needs. This is a fairly significant grant and was hotly debated, but in terms of what it's going to do, it's going to help upgrade a septic system, which will allow them not only to service existing unit at their elder housing village, but will also open the opportunity to add potentially 4 other units. So very exciting for a small amount of money. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Director Morin.
Great, thanks, Chair. Of course, all these organizations are very worthy. I just wanted to note that the Mountain Air Avian Rescue Society, I believe, has expanded to beyond just birds and help with, you know, many different animals, and also work with larger centers and take in animals from other areas. And I think they've been pretty inundated in the last while. So I just wanted to just say I'm really pleased to see that that we're providing some assistance, because I think that they're really overloaded with work, and also you know, taking on animals from outside our region even. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Director Morin. And if I recall, the funding was specifically to bring the school children to the busing, cover the busing costs of bringing them to the center. So thank you for that. Any other comments, questions? Hearing and seeing none, it's a vote of the full board. Anyone opposed? And that is carried. Item number 4, the Comox Valley Sewage Commission.
Second.
Moved and seconded for receipt. Any comments? Hearing, seeing none. Anyone opposed to receipt? And that is carried. Comox Valley Water Committee for September 21st minutes. Moved and seconded by Grant and Cole Hamilton. Vote of the full board. Is anyone opposed? And that is carried. Item number 6, the Greater Merville Hall temporary borrowing bylaw number 680 for receipt. Moved and seconded by Grieve and Arbor, and over to staff.
Thank you very much. I'll just ask Kevin DeVille to come forward and explain what is required here with respect to the borrowing bylaw in the Merville Hall.
Thanks, Kevin. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Russell. Through the chair to the directors, good afternoon. So what's in front of you today, both the report and the bylaw, represents kind of the next steps in moving ahead with the Greater Merville Fire Hall. So as you may recall, back in late 2020, a successful AAP process was undertaken that authorized up to $2 million in borrowing towards the Greater Merville Community Hall, or Greater Merville Fire Hall. Subsequent to that, we did put forward a loan authorization bylaw in December of 2020 to form up that authorization. This just really represents the next step. Prior to going to security issuing, which would obviously lock in at that point long-term, we are moving to short-term or interim financing. So what this bylaw does is authorize our ability to move forward with that interim financing. I'll leave it there and certainly welcome any questions.
Director Green.
Thanks to Kevin. Just wondering, in today's very volatile financial environment, how long are we going to wait until we actually lock it in? Because you pretty well need a crystal ball to figure out which way it's going right now.
Through the chair to Director Grieve, absolutely. I mean, it's something we will obviously always keep an eye on. And if we feel that rates do start creeping up, we would certainly then look to undertake moving forward with locking that in. We're always cognizant of the rates between both short-term and long-term. And so it's something we do watch on a regular basis.
Any other questions? Okay. On receipt, it's a vote of area B and C. Anyone opposed? And that's carried. And we have a recommendation moved and seconded by Arbor. Comments on the recommendation to move forward with the borrowing bylaw? Again, a votive area of B and C. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Looking forward to seeing that go forward. Item number 7, the MFA short-term financing for King Coho wastewater services for receipt. Moved by McCollum, second by Cole Hamilton, and over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Kevin DeVell can explain this particular project and the borrowing required.
Thank you again, Russell, through the chair to the director. So a little bit of a different animal with this one, with the King Coho wastewater service. We are nearing completion of the upgrades to that sewage system. And as such, we are at the stage of needing to enter into the short-term borrowing. However, because the term is anticipated to be less than 5 years, no electoral assent is required. And we simply just need a resolution from the board to enter into that short-term debt, which, as articulated in the staff report, will be for a term of 5 years. And we'll be looking to borrow $33,750 and looking to repay that at $6,750 a year, obviously principal payments plus interest.
Thank you for that report. Comments or questions on Kevin's report? Hearing and seeing none, is anyone opposed to receipt? That's carried, and we have the recommendation. Moved by Grieve and second by Cole Hamilton. Questions? Hearing and seeing none, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. How are a few people feeling? Do you want to go through this before we finish up the agenda? So item number 8, City of Courtenay civic room use. Moved and second by Hillian and Grant, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. Jake Martins, General Manager of Legislative Services, will present the report and answer any of your questions.
Thanks, Jake. Go ahead.
Thank you, Russell, and through the chair. This December will mark 2 years in the new regional office building since it was opened. And as part of the original development of the plans and concepts for this building, staff did initiate conversations with its member municipalities as well as the school district in regards to shared space opportunities and other forms of collaboration. While no formal arrangements materialized at that time, during the subsequent construction, the City of Courtenay did approach the regional district in regards to potential use of the civic room here for their council meetings. Those discussions progressed to a preliminary level and even contemplated the provision of the city's audio and video equipment for installation when the new building would be completed. Ultimately, the city decided to stay course and stay in its own council chambers for its meetings. But subsequently and recently, the city has came forward to express an interest in looking at some sort of shared arrangement to make use of this site for their council meetings. This report seeks the board's authorization to enter into an agreement to facilitate that arrangement. And it's important to note that funding for this building and for the facility as a whole is included as part of the administration and general government services function, in which all municipalities and their electoral areas are participants of that. And as such, a modest fee has been proposed as part of this agreement to ensure that the minor costs associated with the City of Courtenay's use would be addressed and not be subsidized by any of the other members. While the city's schedule does not conflict with the CVRD boards, it is on the same day as the Electoral Area Services Committee, and so I want to acknowledge that the proximity of those two meetings and certainly our intent to try and avoid any issues as far as a lack of timing or time for any either party. Overall, it's felt this proposal aligns well with the board's strategic drivers of community partnerships, and it's also aligned with the organization's vision statement, in which we seek to collaborate with our partners in all opportunities. With that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Great. I see a question by Director Arbour, and then I'll go to Director Keller.
Thanks. Yeah, appreciate the intent, but I think on some of the details, if I'm just looking at yesterday, I think the report speaks about us giving up the room at 2 p.m. on Monday for ESC, but we do have a number of meetings that finished past 2 yesterday. We finished at 2:40. So I'm wondering how you foresee that, or would ESC have to adjourn so that Courtenay can come in? The second question is really based on the history, Cumberland also has their meetings on Mondays. So if they wanted to access the room or whatnot, how does that work? Has Comox been offered that opportunity as well? I'm just trying to think about those different aspects so that there's good equity built in, and yeah, that's my questions.
Thanks to the chair. If there is concern from the board regarding the initial start time of 2 p.m., certainly we could, the agreement's not finalized. We're seeking the board feedback on this now, and so could extend that time. As Director Arbor noted, by and large, it's felt that most of the electoral area services committee meetings finish well before 2 p.m., but there is the odd occasion when they do approach that. And that's, again, where I think there is an opportunity where we could anticipate those as best we can and try and work with the city coordinator to see what their schedule is. But if there is concern, certainly we could propose that 2 p.m. be extended to 3 p.m. or another time for that matter. With respect to the engagement with other municipalities, as I noted at the start, at the initial kind of development of the plan for this building, there was those initial conversations around the opportunities for shared space or collaboration. There was no interest at that time from the other parties, and certainly we've been open to those, but have not specifically reached out to directly try and facilitate such arrangements. So I think where there are conflicts with meetings, we'd have to find a new date, but this does not mean we couldn't accept or look to accommodate other member municipalities in this space if it arose.
Director Kettler.
Yeah, I was wondering if this should be a discussion that was held in camera, because it is talking about a contract, and there are a number of things I think that need to be talked about as far as equitability, prioritization of meeting space, and in the term of the contract, currently 5 years. But I think, those are things that are probably better discussed in an in-camera meeting. Can staff give some feedback on that?
Yeah, through the chair. So certainly this topic would be eligible to discuss in an in-camera session. That's to the board to determine whether you feel this does warrant it. But if the board did choose to go down that route, I may suggest that this item just be tabled until the end of the agenda, given that we have a few other topics on the open agenda still to cover.
I'd be open to a motion if that was the mood of the board.
I'll make that motion.
And Madam Chair, if I could just clarify that the clause within the community charter that would be eligible is 91E, which is related to the potential disposition of property. Should the board feel it would be impactful to have it in an open session.
So the motion is to table the item until the in-camera. Is that what I'm understanding?
Just in recognition of the few remaining items we do have on the agenda. We're right now live streaming and recording the meeting, and it would be problematic for us to stop and then restart that. So just
okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I need to second it. It's seconded. And then we do have to, and are you going to, Director Grant, do you want to speak to that motion or? So we do have two. Sorry.
I think the public don't like that we go in camera as often as we do, and it seems like every meeting we do it. I don't see anything here that's secret. Like, what's the big deal? I don't get it. I mean, this is a city coming and asking if they can use the boardroom. I don't see, I mean, there's maybe some details that need to be worked out, but I don't see any big problem here.
Okay. Are there any other comments on the motion to table this, Director Arbor?
A double click. Yeah, no, I think it's just because there's a contract before us, right? That's long in term, so that's why I'm supportive of discussion in camera. But that's me.
Okay, Director Kettler.
Yeah, just in response to Director Grant, I think in my mind, there are some sensitive things to discuss around resources of participating municipalities. that would be better talked about in camera. Thank you.
Okay, why don't we have a vote then? I think I might actually, let's see, we'll try and do a show of hands. All in favor of tabling the item to the in-camera session? So all in favor? Director Arbor and Director Kettler, that's your hand up. Any opposed? Okay, so that motion is defeated. So we will continue the discussion in the open, and I will go to Director Brandt.
So my only question was, Courtney, is would this be like a full-time thing? Would you move your meetings here, or is this from time to time? Like, is this where you're gonna hold all your meetings?
Is that a question maybe for staff? Would you? I don't know if, I don't think the board knows.
Yeah. At this point, I understand the city coordinator would be looking to move their meetings to the civic room on an ongoing basis.
Okay, because that makes sense. I mean, their chambers are very small and this is a lot bigger. For our community, we have a room about this size, like connected to our council chamber. So I don't see us ever wanting to come and use these ones. It would be an imposition to come all the way down here to go to a meeting when we've already got all there. So I don't see that being a big deal for us.
Director, let's see. Sorry, your director names aren't here on here. You're just a number. So I'm just guessing that's you. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Just Director Grant's question. My understanding is that it's exactly that point. The size of the Courtney council chambers has become an issue during the pandemic, and the use of this space would provide not only for us to resume public delegations, but to meet in a more agreeable manner. The intent is, I believe, to have all of our meetings here and possibly our public hearings as well, but obviously dependent on the space availability. There's no intent to move all our regalia and pictures on the wall and to take over or anything like that. But I think that we've been very limited during the pandemic in our ability to meet and fully engage with our staff, and the electronic capacity of this space, along with the just the space itself, makes it far better suited for our purposes on an ongoing basis. Thanks very much.
I'll see Director McCollum and then Director Kettler after that. So.
Yeah, I don't have much to add after Director Leon's comments. But yeah, I just wanted to underscore that staff have identified what the incremental costs are of us using this room. And it's a very valuable facility, having space for our staff and council to meet in. And, as elected officials, I think we would want to see our resources used to their maximum potential. And, essentially it is the residents of the Comox Valley that have paid for this facility, and we're not really able to provide reasonable public access to our meetings right now because our chambers are extremely limited in size. And it's also my understanding that the naming this room the civic room was an intentional decision, and it's not called the CVRD boardroom for a reason.
Thank you. Director Kettler.
Thanks. Just a few things on prioritization of use. I think that the areas don't have an alternative. And so when we're talking about times that are in conflict there, that there be a priority of use for the areas. And then on the issue of equitability for the region, Cumberland does have limited space and has faced the same issues during COVID as other municipalities. And I don't think that we were offered the same opportunity. So I want to make sure that that is communicated to staff and council at Cumberland. And yeah, we did have a building assessment done in Cumberland saying that most of our civic buildings are past their useful life. So there may come a point where we need to have our council chambers in a different place so that they can be rebuilt or other. And so, yes, I just think that that we need to extend the offer out to other municipalities. And then the term of the contract, I heard most of the Courtney councillors speak to the fact that the impact of COVID has been one of the main issues that they would want to move boardrooms. And so is a 5-year contract appropriate? And would it be better to have some sort of a pilot so we can make sure that it is working for everybody who's participating? I know that staff use that boardroom because most of the building has limited occupancy in the rest of the rooms as well. So just making sure that it is optimally used and that we're not too hamstrung by a 5-year contract. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Director Grieve.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And to comment on Director Gillian's statement, I'd be quite happy if you took my picture off the wall and brought it up here and put them from the council chambers. I mean, everybody knows that, the Courtney council chambers, you basically have to go outside to change your mind. And in the conceptual stage of this building, it was envisioned that this could be used for bigger public hearings and things like that. And there is synergies with the other councils and governing bodies in the area. So I do give credit to a former councillor, Eric Erickson, who was always championing the Comox Valley as one entity and thought this might be a good way to start. So maybe it's a good way to start. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Director Cole Hamilton as a first-time speaker. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I realize that COVID, it seems to, is what prompted this, the thought about the move, and currently we can't have both our staff and ourselves in the same room, which makes for disjointed meetings. But I thought long before COVID, from when I first heard this, that it made perfect sense. And I don't know if anyone in the room has ever tried just mentioning it to someone else. They go, oh, that's a good idea. Like, because it is. It's, I think during the last election, someone was talking about amalgamation, was talking about perhaps if Comox had a street sweeper, which they use 3 days a week, and Courtney had one, which they use 3 days a week, that wouldn't be sensible to share it rather than to each have one park for half the week. And I feel this is a bit like that. This room is a remarkable resource. It's all of the communities in the Comox Valley have contributed to it. I would hate for any of the communities to feel that like the Courtney's just barreling up and taking all the meeting space. It seems to me that there are many other times available if other communities do want to, like Cumberland, do want to avail themselves of this meeting space. And if I understand correctly, it was actually our staff approaching the regional staff rather than the other way around. So it wasn't sort of we got the first offer and took it at the cost of anyone else. I just think that this is a room that makes sense. It's perfectly suited for what we're wanting to do. As Director Grieve said, our boardroom is our current chambers are extremely small, and he suggested we take down his picture. So I'll make a note to our CAO of that. This makes it slightly larger. And just yesterday, I was asked to talk to a group of students at Vanier, and I was trying to explain to them the different levels of government. And one of the reasons I explained that the regional districts exist is to share services where it makes sense. And I said, like, would it really make sense for us all to build our own solid waste facilities and our own water plants and our own sewer plants? And that's why this exists, to sort of find those kind of shared efficiencies. And this room seems like one of those resources. So I'd ask people to consider supporting this. I don't personally see that there's a problem necessarily with a 5-year term, But I'm sure that if there are any bumps in the road, that our staff and your staff will be more than able to make sure that the CVRD isn't inconvenienced anyway.
Thank you. Director Arbor?
Thanks. I guess part of the only thing I would say on I mean, I agree with all of that, but to Director McCollum's point, I think we are not all paying equally for this building. The rural areas were the only ones to fork out $1.5 million of community works funds in order to address this. And so far, I haven't heard any response from staff in regards to us getting bumped at 2 o'clock in order to make for council meetings. So I think you know, there is a history around this building where the rural areas, and I hear it from my residents, they know we contributing dearly some of our precious resources while the rest didn't. So not to be nagging on that, I want you to feel welcome if it proceeds, but it is on Monday, and there are a lot of again, I think that the question from Cumberland, if they're also on Monday, so trying to think holistically around how this is going to work and in detail as well. In terms of the future, it's true that 5 years does give the priority to Courtney. So thank you.
Thank you. I think we've had a pretty fulsome discussion, so I'll just call the question on receipt first. Anyone opposed to receipt? And it's a weighted vote. Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. We have a recommendation. Moved by Grant, seconded by Cole Hamilton. Would anyone like to speak to that recommendation? And I have Director Hillian.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to correct Director Arbor in that I did hear our corporate officer, Jake, speak to amending the time so that it didn't conflict, so that more time was available for the area directors meeting. I also note that Cumberland Council meets on the 2nd and 4th Monday of the month, I believe. And if there was such time in the future where they were looking to avail themselves of the use of this chamber, I think it's within the realm of possibility that something could be worked out to facilitate that. I would certainly support that from wherever I could. So my feeling is that we can make this work in everybody's interests. I don't know that Courtney needs to get in here at 2 o'clock. I think a later start to accommodate the areas is quite feasible. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Grant.
I think the recommendation says to execute an agreement. When you execute an agreement, in my opinion, that means you make an agreement that works for everybody. And I think that's inherent in what's recommended here. So I think we're just making a whole lot out of nothing here. And I think it's a great idea for Courtney to use this.
Thank you. I don't see any other comments or questions, so I'll call the question on the recommendation. It's a vote of everyone, and it is weighted. So all in favor? Any opposed? And Director Kettler, I didn't see if you were then on the favor or the opposed side.
Yeah, I'm in favor of having an agreement. Hopefully it'll come back to the board so that we can see more of the details. And as well, I hope that staff will reach out to the Cumberland Council and staff as well. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. I'm seeing lots of nods. Thank you, everybody. All right, moving on. Bylaws and resolutions for first, second, and third reading. We have bylaw number 679.
Move 679 for first and second reading. Second.
Moved by Grieve and Nicole Hamilton. It's a vote of the areas. Anyone opposed? And that's carried. We have the bylaw for third reading.
Move third.
Grieve and Grant. Again, of the areas. Anyone opposed? And that is carried. Item number 2, bylaw number 680.
Move 680 for first and second.
Grieve and Grant, moved and seconded. Anyone opposed? And seeing none, that is carried. Under new business, there's a bit of new business. So the first item, oh, sorry, we missed third reading. Grant and Hillian. Anyone opposed to third reading? And that is carried. Thank you. So now we can move on to new business. We have the Knight Road bike lanes, correspondence from myself for receipt. Grant and Moran, thank you. And I don't know if staff wanted to speak to it, or I can speak to it. I think the directors have read the letter that's been attached. I want to thank Town of Comox for bringing this forward to the Minister of Transportation, and would love to put in my support for a bike lane to be added on both sides of the road, if that's to move forward. Any other comments or questions on the correspondence? Director Moore, or sorry, Director Swift. Sorry.
Thank you. Just thank you for this. This has been a project that we've really wanted to move ahead. And I think it would be a really missed opportunity if the bike lanes weren't on both sides. So thank you for doing this.
No, totally agree. Thank you. All right. Any other comments? Sorry, thanks, Director Grant. Hold on a second.
I think that what the province was suggesting was to put just some curbs, or not curbs, but shoulders on there. So we did bring this up, and I'm not sure if we'll be successful with the bike lane piece, but it's certainly something we would appreciate as well, because that's probably one of the most used cycling places in the valley, and it's really dangerous. So I think that this is very timely, and we thank you for supporting us on this.
Great, thanks. Dr. Grief, did you have a comment? Dr. Grief.
Thank you. Just briefly, I think that the time has come for Modi to realize it's not about cars all the time. I'm sure we're not the only jurisdiction that's pushing this kind of thing. And we are at a disadvantage in electoral areas. As you know, we are not the purview, don't have the purview over highways. So we really have to rely on the ministry to step up, and hopefully they will.
Thank you. Director Arbor.
My only comment is this a vote of the areas, or this is another one where we need to fix it to all?
Yeah, it's. I'm hearing that it is a vote of the areas as parks and greenways. Okay.
But the recommendation is that the board, right, to the Minister of Transportation. That's why that's probably the part that trips me a bit.
Staff, any other comments?
Yeah, it's a service of the regional district, and as such, it's, the board writes on behalf of the electoral areas that are the participants in the service. If more time had been afforded, this would have been an electoral area committee consideration to bring forward this recommendation. So it's not unusual.
Okay, all right. On receipt, have we voted on receipt? Not yet. Okay, so on receipt, the vote of the three areas, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. We have a requested action moved by Grant and Grieve that the board write to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure to request the planned improvements on Knight Road include a road widening and installation of bicycle lanes on both sides of the road. A vote of the areas, all in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item number 2, the follow-up to the Comox Valley Airport Commission. There is moved by Hillian and seconded by Cole Hamilton. And I don't know if staff want to speak to it at all. Again, this is another letter I've written to the board. Just asking that after the presentation that the Airport Commission gave to the board, I noted that the Airport Commission didn't really, in my opinion, provide a very fulsome indication of their greenhouse gas strategy, at least reduction of their greenhouse gas strategy, noting that many other jurisdictions have partnerships with their airlines to reduce GHGs, and it is one of our drivers. So I brought this to the board just to further write to the Airport Commission and ask them to look at ways of reducing their GHGs. Director Grieve.
I'm very concerned about this. It's going to have the right tone. I do think that we realize that the Airport Commission went through a very tough stretch with COVID, and they managed to keep their staff. They managed to keep some flights in and out during the whole thing, and I think they should be commended for that. Now, when you're talking about the actual commission, it's a, as you know, it's a federally chartered society, so it's beyond our reach. And it only applies to the actual building, that unlike other airports, we're dealing with the Ministry of Defense, Department of Defense. Now, this leads me to think that we should be writing letters to CFD Comox. And why stop there? Why not write a letter to School District 71, maybe Island Health, Canada Post? I just think that we have to be careful not to be overreaching here. I think that the signal we're sending is good. I mean, but it could be something that would be settled with, you know, maybe a phone call to find out what they are doing. I'm very confident that, much like our facilities, that when they need a new heat exchanger, they're going to go out and get the most modern, efficient one they can. And it's a building, it's a big building. It was built, you know, some time ago, but, you know, as things reach the end of their natural life, then they can be replaced. And I don't think that that's lost on the Airport Commission. So I just think that this could be misconstrued as being maybe a little bit of pre-silly season grandstanding. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grief. I'll maybe respond to that. You know, I think as it was mentioned in their own presentation, I just noted it looked like a missed opportunity for them, because there are many airports around the country that are doing work at reducing their GHGs. The Federal Ministry of Transport has actually committed to reducing their GHGs, and so potentially there's funding available for it. But I do want to send the message that we are watching, because I mean, they are you know, they are a separate organization, but we do you know, put forward names to their board. So that was my intention. Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair, and I appreciate all the points raised, but I have full confidence that staff can set the right tone in a letter like this. I don't think it hurts. We're thanking them for their presentation and reminding them that the climate crisis is a major driver for us, and that hopefully we would be hearing more about what they're doing in that direction, as every major organization in the country is starting to look at. So I don't think it's inappropriate, and I'm sure staff will set the right tone. Thanks.
Thank you. And Director Swift.
Thank you. I think this is well intentioned, and it comes from a genuine concern over GHG emissions, but perhaps a more appropriate opportunity would be to invite them back to speak on what they are doing about GHG emissions. I don't think that it is our role to be the gatekeeper for GHG emissions. So I would be very concerned that they get singled out regarding this, when, as has been mentioned, there's the base, there's the college, the hospital. There's lots of major employers out there that are contributing to the GHG issue as well. So I wouldn't mind an invitation if we're concerned that they come and talk to us about it, but I don't think it's up to us to decide what their priorities are.
Director Grant.
I guess for me, I didn't hear him say anywhere in his presentation that they weren't working on reducing GHGs. I think he came with a presentation going one direction. He got caught by a question that he wasn't prepared for, and he gave you a bit of an answer. To me, if that happens, I would just phone him up and say, hey, can we sit down and talk about this? You might find that they're already doing all these things. Sending a letter seems a little heavy-handed to begin with. If after you speak to them, you don't get what you want, well, maybe we could talk about it then, but it just seems like we're taking a really heavy-handed approach on an independent board that we really have no sway over at all. Like, they could ignore your letter and not even bother. So I would think it would be more appropriate, if you have a concern, just phone up Mike Atkins and talk to him. He'd be happy to talk to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to reiterate that the climate change lens is one of the board's lenses, and that I was writing this request, seeing that this is a broad priority, and that transportation is one of the largest contributors to GHG emissions in the Comox Valley. And as seeing as they are an airport, this would be an incredibly important place for GHG reductions to happen. I take the point that it would be great to hear a presentation. So maybe if staff are putting the letter together, to invite them to come back and report about what their GHG reduction strategy is going to be. I think that would maybe soften the tone a bit more in the letter. So thank you for those. I'll call the question on receipt. Anyone opposed to receiving the item on the agenda? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And there is a requested action that we thank them for the presentation and that encourage them to consider climate crisis as a top priority and invite them to present to the board. I would make that adjustment. Moved by Cole Hamilton and seconded by Morin. And comments on the requested action, Director Grieve?
Yeah, I think that we've tried to soften it up a little bit, and but I do say that it could be perceived as a bit of finger wagging, and we have a very good relationship with our airport commission, and I think that the tone of the letter is paramount. It's all about inviting them back here. We don't need to be chastising and tutting, because after all, you know, we've got our own house to get in order. Thank you.
Thank you. Point taken. Any other comments on the requested action? Do folks need it to be read back or, yeah? Sorry, Director McCollum.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to make the comment that I appreciate the suggested amendment with the invitation for dialogue. I think dialogue goes a bit further in terms of, you know, reaching what we're trying to do with this motion, which is, you know, have that consideration brought to the forefront in some decision making and one of our partnering boards. So I think that that's a really good suggestion and improvement.
Yeah, thank you for those recommendations. So on the requested action, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? That's Arbor, Grant, and Grieve. Director Kettler, sorry, which way was your vote going?
I'm in favor.
In favor, thank you. And carries? And that carries. Thank you. Item number 3, the climate emergency campaign request. We have correspondence from September 24th, moved and seconded for receipt by Grant and Cole Hamilton. And over to staff.
Yeah, just to say this was a request of a local organization that appears to be writing to the other councils within the area, and they're requesting support of this matter.
Comments about the item that we received? No, hearing and seeing none, I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed to receipt? That's carried, and we have a requested action calling. Moved by Grant, seconded by Cole Hamilton, calling on the BC government to confront the climate emergency with bold action. Comments, questions on the requested action? Hearing and seeing none. Anyone opposed? And that is carried. Can I get a motion for us to, I believe there's nothing else on the agenda or media. Motion to move in camera? Moved by Grant, seconded by Grieve, I believe. Thank you. Why don't we take, should we take